The massive chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with excited chatter as hundreds of alien delegates filled their seats. Representatives from 47 different species had gathered for what they considered the most amusing presentation of the year. Ambassador Zektar of the Velinary stood at the center podium, his four arms gesturing dramatically as holographic displays showed images and videos from a small blue planet called Earth. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," Zektar announced, his voice carrying across the chamber with barely contained amusement, "today we examine the most delightful collection of primitive folklore ever encountered. The humans of Earth have created the most entertaining mythology about their own capabilities that our xenological department has ever documented." A wave of polite laughter rippled through the assembled delegates. Captain Jake Morrison sat quietly in the small human section, his weathered face showing no emotion as he watched the alien ambassador mock his species. Beside him, Lisa Hayes took careful notes on her tablet, recording every word and reaction for later analysis. They had been invited to observe this session as a courtesy, though it was clear the council viewed them more as curiosities than equals. The first holographic display showed a human male in military gear swimming through turbulent water while carrying heavy equipment. Zektar pointed at the image with one of his long fingers. The humans claim that members of their species can remain underwater for extended periods, sometimes up to 4 minutes, while performing complex tasks. They call these individuals Navy SEALs and insist they can operate in aquatic environments that would challenge even our Zephyrian friends. The Zephyrian delegate, a sleek, blue-skinned being with gill slits along her neck, made a sound that might have been laughter. "How charming," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality of her species. "These land-dwelling mammals believe they can match aquatic specialists who evolved in water over millions of years. Their primitive lungs could never sustain such activity." The next display showed humans climbing vertical rock faces using only their hands and feet with minimal equipment. "Mountain climbing," Zektar explained with obvious amusement. "The humans tell stories of individuals who scale impossible heights, sometimes in conditions that would kill most sentient beings. They claim some of their people can survive in environments with reduced oxygen, extreme cold, and constant danger of falling to their deaths." Quendel, the crystalline Shardani representative, shimmered with what his species displayed as humor. The gravitational forces alone would make such activities impossible for most species. These humans must have remarkable imaginations to create such elaborate fantasies about defying basic physics. Captain Morrison felt Lisa tense beside him, but he placed a gentle hand on her arm. They had agreed to observe and learn, not to defend or argue. The aliens would discover the truth soon enough. The presentation continued with more human legends that the council found endlessly entertaining. Stories of humans called firefighters who deliberately entered burning buildings to save others. Tales of mountain rescue teams who operated in blizzards and avalanches. Accounts of combat medics who provided medical care while under enemy fire. Each story was met with more laughter and dismissive comments from the alien audience. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the expedition's xenobiologist, watched from the back of the human section as each species revealed their assumptions about human limitations. The Velinary, despite their advanced technology, were physically fragile and required environmental suits for most activities outside their controlled habitats. The Zephyrians, while excellent in aquatic environments, struggled with the concept of air-breathing beings operating underwater at all. The Shardani, whose crystalline bodies were incredibly strong, couldn't understand how soft biological tissue could endure extreme stresses. "Perhaps the most amusing human legend," Zektar continued, "involves their military forces. They claim to have individuals who can march for days carrying heavy equipment, survive in deserts, jungles, and Arctic conditions, and continue fighting even when wounded. They call them soldiers and insist that ordinary humans can be trained to endure hardships that would kill most galactic species." The chamber erupted in louder laughter this time. The Krillian delegate, an insectoid being with a rigid exoskeleton, clicked his mandibles in amusement. The soft-bodied humans surviving in conditions that challenge armored species. How wonderfully creative their storytellers must be. Ambassador Zektar saved what he considered the best for last. The humans even claim their entire species evolved on what they call a Deathworld. They insist that their home planet is so dangerous that it has shaped them into beings capable of surviving anywhere. They speak of natural disasters, predatory animals, and environmental extremes as if they were normal parts of daily life. The alien audience was in full appreciation now. The concept of an entire species evolving on a hostile world was so ridiculous that even the more serious delegates were showing signs of amusement. The Velinari had evolved on a peaceful garden world with gentle weather and abundant resources. The Zephyrians came from calm ocean worlds with stable climates. The Shardani had developed on mineral-rich planets with predictable geological activity. In the interest of galactic harmony, Zektar announced as the laughter died down, we propose relocating the human species to a more suitable world. Clearly, their current planet is too dangerous for such a delicate species. We have identified several garden worlds that would provide them with safe environments where they can develop their civilization without the stress of survival. Captain Morrison finally stood up, his movement causing a ripple of attention through the chamber. His voice was calm and steady as he addressed the council. With respect to the assembled delegates, we appreciate your concern for our welfare. However, we would like to propose an alternative. Zektar looked surprised that the human was speaking. Please, Captain Morrison, share your thoughts. Allow us to demonstrate the truth of these stories you find so amusing, Morrison said simply. Choose one of your most challenging worlds, one that has defeated colonization attempts by advanced species. Give us permission to establish a settlement there. If we succeed, perhaps the Council will reconsider their assessment of human capabilities. The chamber fell silent for a moment before erupting in excited chatter. The aliens were clearly delighted by this proposal. Here was a chance to prove their superiority. While appearing generous and fair, Zektar consulted with several other delegates before responding. The Council accepts your proposal, Captain Morrison. We will select an appropriate world for your demonstration. Are you certain your people understand the risks involved? Morrison smiled for the first time during the session. Ambassador, risk is what humans do best. The betting pools opened immediately after the session ended, with odds heavily favoring human failure and rapid evacuation. None of the alien observers suspected they were about to witness the transformation of galactic understanding about what was possible for a species that had learned to thrive on the ultimate death world. The human expedition ship Terra's Pride dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, and even the most experienced crew members felt their breath catch at the sight before them. The planet hung in space like an angry red eye, its surface covered in swirling storm systems that never seemed to end. Lightning flickered constantly between the clouds, creating a light show that would have been beautiful if it weren't so terrifying. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, studying the preliminary scans with Lieutenant Commander Ryan Clark, the expedition's survival specialist. The data scrolling across their screens painted a picture of a world that seemed designed to kill anything that dared to land on it. The gravity was nearly twice Earth normal. The atmosphere contained enough sulfur compounds to dissolve most metals, and the temperature swings were extreme enough to crack stone. Well, Captain, Clark said with a grin that surprised the alien observers monitoring their communications, looks like the Council really went all out to find us a challenge. The Galactic Council had chosen Kepler 442c specifically because it had already claimed 3 separate colonization attempts. The Velinari had lost an entire scientific expedition when their environmental domes failed during a storm. The Zephyrians had abandoned their attempt after their aquatic specialists discovered the planet's water was too acidic for their biology. The Shardani had lasted the longest, but even their crystalline bodies couldn't handle the constant seismic activity that shattered their settlements. Dr. Elena Rodriguez moved between the science stations, coordinating atmospheric analysis while keeping one eye on the Council's observation feeds. She could see dozens of alien delegates watching their every move. waiting for the first signs of human panic or requests for better equipment. Instead, she watched her crewmates adapt to the challenge with the same calm efficiency they had shown during their worst training exercises on Earth. Sergeant Kate Williams was already modifying their landing gear in the cargo bay, her experience in combat engineering proving invaluable as she reinforced their equipment for the crushing gravity. The modifications were practical rather than revolutionary improvements that any competent engineer could have made with enough time and the right materials. "The seismic readings are off the charts," reported Chief Petty Officer Sam Peterson from the navigation station. "The whole planet's crust is unstable. We're looking at constant earthquakes, volcanic activity, and unpredictable terrain shifts." Peterson had spent 15 years as a Navy SEAL before joining the space program, and his calm assessment of the dangerous conditions made several alien observers check their translation systems. They had expected fear, concern, or at least hesitation from the humans. Instead, they were witnessing what seemed like professional interest in a challenging but manageable situation, the landing site. Selection process became the first real surprise for the galactic audience. While previous colonization attempts had chosen the most sheltered locations possible, Captain Morrison deliberately selected a spot that would expose them to the planet's full range of hazards. The landing zone was near an active storm system, within range of volcanic activity, and subject to the strongest gravitational anomalies. "Sir," Lisa Hayes said from the communications station, "the Council is asking if we want to reconsider our landing coordinates. They're suggesting we might want to find somewhere more protected." Morrison looked at the storm-lashed landscape on the main screen and smiled. "Tell them we appreciate their concern, but we want to experience everything Kepler 442c has to offer." The actual landing became a demonstration of human adaptability that left the alien observers speechless. As Terra's pride descended through the violent atmosphere, the crew worked with practiced efficiency to compensate for wind shears that would have torn apart most spacecraft. The gravity that should have been crushing them into their seats was manageable because every human on the expedition had trained extensively in high-gravity environments. The ship touched down in the middle of a lightning storm, and within minutes the crew was already preparing for surface operations. The alien observers expected to see massive environmental suits and heavy protective gear, but instead watched humans don relatively simple breathing apparatus and protective clothing that looked more like advanced camping gear than serious survival equipment. Staff Sergeant Amy Collins was the first to step onto the planet's surface, her boots crunching on the volcanic sand as she surveyed their new home. The gravity that had defeated previous expeditions felt like wearing a heavy pack during mountain training. The toxic atmosphere required breathing equipment, but nothing more sophisticated than what human deep-sea divers had been using for decades. "Base camp established," Collins reported over the comm system. "Ground is stable enough for unloading. Weather's about what we expected from the briefings." The unloading process turned into an education for the watching aliens. They had seen other species struggle with Kepler 442c's conditions, requiring mechanical assistance and frequent rest periods. The humans worked steadily in the crushing gravity, moving equipment and supplies with the same methodical efficiency they would have shown on Earth. Dr. Rodriguez set up her scientific equipment while monitoring the alien reaction feeds. The veterinary delegates were frantically reviewing their database entries on human physiology, clearly struggling to understand how the humans were functioning so normally in conditions that had overwhelmed their own people. The Zephyrians were calculating the energy requirements for the humans' activities, and finding the results didn't match their expectations. The first major test came when the storm system they had landed near began moving toward their position. The alien observers prepared to document the expedition's first major crisis, expecting to see panic, evacuation procedures, or desperate requests for emergency extraction. Instead, they watched the humans welcome the approaching storm as an opportunity to test their equipment and procedures. "Storm's about 6 hours out," Peterson reported from the weather station. "Wind speeds up to 200 kilometers per hour with heavy electrical activity. Perfect conditions for a full systems check. The betting pools that had opened after the council session were already showing signs of nervousness. Some alien observers were quietly moving their wagers from immediate human failure to humans might last a few days. The most optimistic bets were still heavily against human success, but the early signs were not matching alien expectations. As the storm approached and the first drops of acid rain began to fall, the human expedition continued their work with the same calm determination that had carried their species through ice ages, plagues, and wars. The legends the aliens had laughed at were about to become documented reality, and the galaxy was about to learn that Earth's children were far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The storm hit just after midnight, and the Galactic Council observers prepared themselves to witness the human expedition's first major crisis. The wind howled across the landscape at speeds that would have leveled most structures, while lightning struck the ground every few seconds with enough force to melt rock. The acid rain that fell between the electrical strikes was strong enough to eat through most metals within hours. Chief Petty Officer Sam Peterson stood at the edge of the human base camp, watching the approaching wall of destruction with the same calm expression he might have worn while observing storm clouds over the Pacific Ocean. The alien observers monitoring the situation expected to see panic, desperate preparations for evacuation, or at least some sign of concern from the humans. Instead, they watched Peterson check his equipment one final time and step directly into the storm. "Peterson's moving to secure the perimeter sensors," Captain Morrison reported to the council observers. "Standard procedure for severe weather operations." The Zephyrian delegate monitoring the communications nearly fell from her observation chair. Standard procedure meant the humans regularly operated in conditions that would kill most galactic species. She watched in amazement as Peterson moved through the storm like it was nothing more than a heavy rainstorm, his breathing apparatus protecting him from the toxic atmosphere while his protective gear shed the acid rain without any apparent damage. The real shock came when Peterson reached the equipment cache near the flooded ravine. The storm had turned the normally dry creek bed into a raging torrent of acidic water that moved with enough force to sweep away vehicles. The equipment case containing their primary communications relay had been caught in the flood, and was now underwater in the middle of the deadly current. The alien observers expected Peterson to mark the equipment as lost and retreat to safety. Instead, they watched him strip off his outer protective gear and dive into the floodwaters without hesitation. The Zephyrians, who considered themselves the galaxy's aquatic specialists, found themselves calculating the impossibility of what they were seeing. Peterson disappeared beneath the churning surface for nearly a minute before emerging with the equipment case. He fought against the current with smooth, powerful strokes that carried him, and the heavy case toward the bank despite the water's attempts to sweep them downstream. The alien observers realized they were watching a member of a supposedly primitive species perform aquatic operations that exceeded their own people's capabilities. "Communications relay recovered," Peterson reported calmly as he climbed out of the floodwaters. "System checks are running normally." The betting pool shifted dramatically as alien observers began to realize the human legends about underwater operations might not be legends at all. The Zephyrian delegate was frantically reviewing every piece of data they had collected about human physiology, trying to understand how air-breathing mammals could perform better in water than her own aquatic species. Meanwhile, Staff Sergeant Amy Collins was proving another set of impossible human stories. The storm had knocked out their primary communications array, which was mounted on a 200-meter cliff face that offered the best signal coverage. The replacement would require someone to climb the sheer rock wall during the storm, install new equipment, and descend safely while lightning struck around them every few seconds. The Chardani delegate, who had mocked human climbing stories during the council session, watched in disbelief as Collins began scaling the cliff face using minimal equipment. Her movements were smooth and efficient, finding handholds and footholds that seemed impossible for a soft biological form to use. The crushing gravity that had defeated previous colonization attempts seemed to have no effect on her ability to climb. Collins is halfway up, reported Lieutenant Commander Ryan Clark, who was monitoring the climb from the base camp. She's making good time despite the conditions. The crystalline Shardani delegate began running calculations on the physical requirements for such a climb. The gravity, the wind resistance, the energy expenditure, and the strength needed to support body weight while moving vertically all exceeded what his species considered possible for biological tissue. Yet there was Collins. Moving up the cliff face like gravity was merely a suggestion. Lightning struck the cliff face twice while Collins was climbing, but she simply paused until the electrical activity moved away and continued her ascent. The alien observers were beginning to understand that humans didn't avoid dangerous conditions. They adapted to them and kept working regardless of the risks. Equipment installed, Collins reported from the top of the cliff. Communications array is online and functioning at full capacity. Her descent was even more impressive than the climb. Instead of carefully working her way down the same route, Collins used a technique called rappelling that let her control her fall using nothing but rope and her own body weight. She moved down the cliff face in smooth bounds that covered dozens of meters at a time, landing lightly on narrow ledges before pushing off for the next section. The storm continued to rage around the human base camp, but the expedition's work never stopped. Dr. Elena Rodriguez collected atmospheric samples during the worst of the weather, her scientific instruments protected by simple but effective engineering solutions. The readings she was getting would have been impossible for most species to obtain, since they required extended exposure to conditions that would kill most galactic life forms. Sergeant Kate Williams led a team to reinforce their shelter systems, working in the storm with the same methodical efficiency they had shown during the landing. The modifications she made were practical improvements that any competent engineer could have designed, but they required physical capabilities that most species simply didn't possess. The alien observers were beginning to realize that every legend they had laughed at during the council session was actually a documented capability. The stories about humans operating underwater weren't mythology, they were training records. The tales about climbing impossible heights weren't folklore, they were standard operational procedures. The accounts of humans working in deadly conditions weren't exaggerations, they were job descriptions. As the storm finally began to move away from the base camp, the human expedition had not only survived, but had actually improved their position. They had recovered critical equipment, upgraded their communications, and gathered valuable scientific data, all while operating in conditions that had defeated 3 previous colonization attempts by advanced species. The betting pools were in chaos as alien observers scrambled to adjust their expectations. The humans weren't just surviving on Kepler 442c, they were beginning to make it look easy. The legends were real, and the galaxy was about to learn that Earth's children were far more capable than anyone had imagined. 3 weeks had passed since the storm, and the human expedition had settled into a routine that left the Galactic Council observers speechless. What should have been a desperate struggle for survival had become something that looked remarkably like a normal work schedule. The humans woke up each morning, ate their breakfast, and went about their tasks as if they were working on any other planet in the galaxy. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had established a complete scientific research station in conditions that would have required massive environmental domes for most species. Her daily routine included collecting samples from the acidic lakes, studying the volcanic formations, and monitoring the atmospheric changes that occurred during the planet's frequent weather shifts. The alien observers watched her work in protective gear that seemed almost casual compared to the heavy environmental suits other species required. The breakthrough moment came when the expedition discovered the cave system. The entrance was hidden behind a waterfall of acidic water that fell from a height of nearly 300 meters. The opening led into a network of tunnels that extended deep into the planet's unstable crust, where constant seismic activity made every step dangerous. Most species would have marked the area as too hazardous to explore and moved on to safer research sites. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Clark stood at the cave entrance, studying the geological surveys with the same careful attention he had given to cave systems in Kentucky and Mexico during his training years. The toxic gases seeping from the tunnels would have been lethal to most galactic species, but his atmospheric analysis showed they were manageable with proper breathing equipment and safety procedures. We're looking at a complex system that goes down at least 500 meters, Clark reported to Captain Morrison. The tunnels are stable enough for exploration, but we'll need to watch for gas pockets and water levels. The alien observers couldn't believe what they were hearing. The humans were planning to explore a cave system that extended into the planet's most dangerous regions, where crushing pressure, toxic gases, and unstable rock formations created conditions that would challenge even the most advanced technology. The Chardani delegate was frantically reviewing safety protocols, trying to understand how soft biological forms could survive in environments that would stress their crystalline bodies. The exploration team consisted of Clark, Peterson, and Collins, 3 humans who approached the deadly cave system with the same methodical preparation they might have used for any challenging but routine operation. They checked their equipment, tested their communications, and entered the tunnel system with headlamps and safety lines as their primary protection against the hostile environment. The first chamber they discovered was larger than anyone had expected, with walls that sparkled with mineral deposits and a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above their lights. The air was thick with gases that would have been immediately fatal to most species. But the humans moved through the space with careful efficiency, taking samples and mapping the area for future research. "This is incredible," Rodriguez reported over the CUM system as she studied the mineral formations. "The geological processes here are unlike anything we've seen before. The combination of volcanic activity and chemical weathering has created formations that shouldn't be possible according to standard planetary geology." The alien observers realized they were watching humans not just survive in impossible conditions, but actually advance scientific knowledge while doing it. The expedition was gathering data that would have been impossible for most species to obtain, simply because they were the only ones capable of reaching the areas where that data existed. The real test came when a seismic event shook the cave system while the exploration team was nearly 400 meters underground. The tunnels groaned and shifted as the planet's crust moved, and loose rocks began falling from the ceiling. The alien observers expected to witness a desperate evacuation, but instead watched the humans calmly secure their equipment and take shelter in a stable section of the tunnel. "Minor seismic activity," Clark reported as the shaking subsided. "No structural damage to the main passages. We're continuing the survey." The Velinari delegate monitoring the situation found herself checking the translation systems again. Minor seismic activity meant the humans considered an underground earthquake that would have terrified most species to be nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. They were continuing their work in conditions that would have sent other expeditions fleeing to the surface. The expedition's medical capabilities became apparent when Sergeant Williams injured her shoulder during equipment malfunction. A heavy piece of scientific gear had shifted during transport, pinning her against a rock wall with enough force to dislocate her shoulder and cause significant bruising. Most species would have required immediate evacuation to proper medical facilities. Dr. Frank Collins, the expedition's medic, treated the injury in the field using techniques that seemed almost primitive to the alien observers. He relocated the shoulder joint using manual manipulation, stabilized the injury with simple bracing, and administered pain medication that allowed Williams to continue working within hours of the accident. "Williams is cleared for light duty," Collins reported. "She'd be back to full capacity within a few days." The Galactic Council's medical experts were reviewing the treatment records with growing amazement. The humans had performed field surgery and rehabilitation in conditions that would have challenged the best medical facilities in the galaxy. The patient was not only mobile but actually continuing to work in the hostile environment while recovering from injuries that would have incapacitated most species. The cave exploration continued for another week, with the team mapping over 2 kilometers of tunnel systems and discovering mineral deposits that could revolutionize galactic manufacturing. They worked in spaces where the air pressure was crushing, the gases were toxic, and the rock formations were constantly shifting due to seismic activity. The final surprise came when the team discovered an underground lake system that extended even deeper into the planet's crust. The water was so acidic it would have dissolved most metals within minutes, and the pressure at those depths should have been impossible for biological forms to survive. The human team descended into the water, using equipment that looked more like advanced diving gear than serious survival technology. "We're at 50 meters depth," Peterson reported from the underwater exploration. "Water clarity is better than expected. We're getting excellent readings on the mineral content and geological formations." The alien observers realized they were watching. Humans operate in conditions that combine the worst aspects of deep space, toxic planets, and crushing ocean depths. The legends they had laughed at were not only real, but represented capabilities that exceeded what most galactic species could achieve with their best technology. As the exploration team finally emerged from the cave system, they carried with them scientific data that would advance galactic knowledge for generations. They had proven that human legends were actually comprehensive technical capabilities, and the galaxy was beginning to understand that Earth's children were the ultimate survivors. 6 months after the Terra's Pride had first landed on Kepler 442c, Captain Jake Morrison stood before the Galactic Council in person for the second time. The massive chamber that had once echoed with laughter and dismissive comments now sat in complete silence as he prepared to deliver his final report. The betting pools had closed weeks earlier when it became clear that not only had the humans survived, but they had established something that looked remarkably like a thriving colony. The holographic displays around the chamber showed images that would have been impossible to believe if they hadn't been documented by the Council's own observation systems. Where once there had been nothing but hostile wilderness, a human settlement now stood in defiance of everything the galaxy thought it knew about planetary colonization. Buildings designed to withstand the crushing gravity and corrosive atmosphere housed scientific laboratories, living quarters, and workshops that operated around the clock. "Honored delegates," Morrison began, his voice carrying easily across the silent chamber, "I am pleased to report that the human expedition to Kepler 442c has exceeded all mission objectives. We have not only established a permanent settlement, but have begun the process of transforming this world into a viable research station and potential colony site." Ambassador Zektar, who had opened the proceedings 6 months earlier with such confidence and amusement, now found himself struggling to process what he was seeing. The Velinari had lost an entire expedition to this same planet, yet the humans were not just surviving, but actually expanding their presence. The environmental conditions that had defeated his people seemed to pose no significant challenge to these supposedly primitive beings. Dr. Elena Rodriguez presented the scientific achievements with quiet pride. The expedition had cataloged over 300 new mineral formations, discovered 15 previously unknown geological processes, and gathered enough atmospheric data to revolutionize galactic understanding of hostile world weather patterns. The research they had conducted would have been impossible for most species, simply because no one else could survive long enough in the necessary locations to gather the information. The cave system alone has provided us with geological samples that represent 200 million years of planetary evolution, Rodriguez explained to the fascinated alien audience. The mineral deposits we've discovered could supply the galaxy's manufacturing needs for centuries, and the unique formation processes we've documented are already leading to advances in materials science. The Shardani delegate, whose people had abandoned their own colonization attempt after their structures were destroyed by seismic activity, watched in amazement as Rodriguez described human mining operations that actually used the planet's geological instability to their advantage. The humans had learned to predict and work with the earthquake patterns rather than fighting against them. Lieutenant Commander Clark's presentation on human adaptation techniques left the alien observers questioning everything they thought they knew about environmental limitations. The humans had not brought massive terraforming equipment or environmental domes. Instead, they had simply adapted their procedures and equipment to work within the planet's existing conditions. Standard human survival training prepared us for most of what Kepler 442c could offer, Clark explained with the same calm professionalism he had shown throughout the mission. The gravity is similar to what our military personnel train with? Regularly. The atmospheric conditions are manageable with equipment that's been in use on Earth for decades. The geological activity follows patterns that are actually more predictable than some Earth environments. The alien delegates realized they were hearing a casual description of capabilities that exceeded their own species' most advanced survival technologies. The humans were treating conditions that had defeated galactic civilizations as routine training, scenarios that any competent individual could handle with proper preparation. The most shocking revelation came when Morrison described the expedition's expansion plans. Rather than requesting evacuation or even additional support, the humans were proposing to establish Kepler 442c as a training facility for other species who wanted to improve their own survival capabilities. We believe this world could serve as an excellent testing ground for equipment and procedures, Morrison explained. The conditions here represent a comprehensive challenge that could help other species develop better survival technologies and training programs. The offer was so unexpected that several delegates had to request translation verification. The humans were proposing to help other species learn to survive in conditions that had previously been considered impossible. They were offering to share the techniques and knowledge that had allowed them to not just survive, but thrive on a world that the galaxy had written off as UNSURVIVIA, Quinn single quote. The Zephyrian delegate who had mocked human aquatic abilities was the first to respond. Captain Morrison, my people would be honored to learn from your underwater operational techniques. Our own aquatic specialists have reviewed your diving operations and admit they represent capabilities we had not thought possible for air-breathing species. The Shardani representative spoke next, his crystalline form shimmering with what his species displayed as respect. The climbing and mountaineering techniques your people demonstrated exceed our own capabilities despite our structural advantages. We would welcome the opportunity to study your methods. One by one, the alien delegates who had dismissed human stories as primitive mythology began requesting access to human training programs and technical knowledge. The species that had laughed at tailies of Navy SEALs now wanted to learn underwater operations. The civilizations that had mocked stories of mountain climbers were asking for climbing instruction. The governments that had dismissed accounts of military endurance wanted to understand human physical conditioning. Ambassador Zektar rose from his seat with obvious difficulty, his forearms trembling slightly as he addressed the human delegation. Captain Morrison, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I must formally apologize for our misunderstanding of your species' capabilities. We now recognize that what we dismissed as primitive legends were actually comprehensive records of abilities that exceed our own technological solutions. The chamber erupted in a sound that had never been heard before in the Council's history. 47 different species were applauding in their own unique ways, creating a symphony of appreciation that acknowledged humanity's place among the galaxy's most capable survivors. Morrison smiled as he looked out at the assembled delegates, knowing that back on Earth there were billions more humans with equally impressive stories. Stories of firefighters who ran into burning buildings, of doctors who worked in war zones, of engineers who built structures in impossible locations, of ordinary people who did extraordinary things because that's what the situation required. The galaxy had learned that human legends were not legends at all, but simply Tuesday for the children of the ultimate Deathworld. Earth had spent millions of years forging a species that could survive anywhere, and now the galaxy was ready to learn from the masters of survival themselves.